First tonight, he touched millions of lives with his compassion, warmth, and humor. Now tributes are pouring in for beloved Judge Frank Caprio, who passed away.
Humanity lost another hero, another gem, another angel on earth. At 88, the passing of Judge Frank Caprio is more than just the loss of a man. It marks the end of an era defined by empathy, justice, and humanity.
And finally tonight, the judge with a heart of gold. He was the compassionate courtroom judge seen by millions, whose rulings changed so many lives for the better.
I think 9:59 is close enough to 10.
Beloved for his compassionate rulings and viral courtroom moments, Caprio transcended the bench, becoming a global symbol of kindness and justice. His death is deeply tragic, not only because of who he was, but because the world now feels colder without him. What exactly happened in his final years? Everyone prayed he did not battle cancer. You know how life sometimes shifts so suddenly that it almost doesn't feel real? One moment, you're watching your favorite judge hand out gentle justice with a wink and a warm smile. And the next, he's sharing a deeply personal message about a battle no one saw coming. That's how the final years of Judge Frank Caprio's life unfolded. A quiet storm of courage, family, hope, and undeniable grace. It all began in late 2023 when Judge Caprio, then 87 years old, announced that he had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It wasn't a dramatic or rehearsed message, it was just him speaking honestly to the camera. He said he wanted people to pray for him, and that small, simple request hit hard. He wasn't trying to make anyone feel sorry for him. He just wanted to be real about what he was going through. That's what made him so easy to love in the first place, his humanity. He didn't wear a robe to create distance. He wore it like a neighbor might wear a sweater, comfortable, approachable, and familiar. And when he asked the world to keep him in their thoughts, people did. Messages of support poured in. People from all walks of life. Those who had watched his courtroom clips, those who had been inspired by his fairness and warmth, reached out to lift him up. His family, especially his wife Joyce and their 5 children, became his biggest support system. Through the intense chemo treatments and radiation sessions, they were by his side every single step of the way. He often spoke about how grateful he was for them, how they helped him stay strong even on days when the pain and exhaustion felt like too much. And that pain was real. The treatment was tough, grueling, really. He went through months of chemotherapy and several rounds of radiation. For anyone, that's a mountain. But for someone pushing 88, it was nothing short of heroic. Still, he kept showing up, kept smiling, kept talking about hope. There were moments when the treatment took everything out of him. Moments when he could barely move, let alone speak. But he never lost that spark. He never stopped believing that he could still make it through. At one point, he traveled with a few of his sons to Lourdes, France, a place known for healing and miracles. For him, it wasn't just about medicine. It was about faith, about connecting with something deeper. And even in the midst of that deeply spiritual experience, he found joy, gratitude, and a sense of peace that seemed to light him up from the inside. He celebrated the completion of his treatment in the spring of 2024 by ringing the healing bell at the Cancer Center, a small but powerful tradition for many going through cancer. And you could tell that moment meant everything to him. It wasn't just a bell, it was a symbol of fight, family, and faith. He didn't slow down after that either. That summer, he attended public events, spent time with his loved ones, and kept doing what he always did, making people feel seen, heard, and loved. And through it all, he found purpose in helping others facing the same battle. He raised money, spread awareness, and spoke openly about what it's like to live with cancer, especially at his age. He didn't pretend it was easy, But he reminded everyone that even in the darkest moments, there's still room for light. By the end of the year, he was still holding on strong. But cancer is cruel. In the summer of 2025, just months after what seemed like a hopeful recovery, he shared another message, this time from a hospital bed. He said he had suffered a setback. His voice was quieter, but still warm, still full of gratitude, still asking for prayers. And then, on August 20th, 2025, Judge Frank Caprio passed away peacefully, surrounded by his loved ones. The news spread fast. People were heartbroken, of course, but also reflective. His life wasn't defined by his illness. It was defined by how he faced it, with courage, with honesty, with the same compassion he'd shown so many people in his courtroom. So when we talk about Judge Caprio's final years, we're not just talking about a man who got sick. We're talking about a man who kept showing up, even when his body was failing him. A man who leaned on his faith, loved his family fiercely, and continued to inspire others even in his most vulnerable moments. His story in those last years wasn't just about pain. It was about presence, about choosing to be hopeful, loving, and human until the very end. And honestly, that's probably the most Judge Caprio way he could have written the last chapter of his life. Why is Judge Caprio beloved all over the world? It's not every day that a municipal court judge becomes a global icon. Let's be honest. Most of us couldn't name a single other judge from a small city courtroom, let alone feel emotionally connected to one. But Judge Frank Caprio, he broke that mold completely. Somehow, this soft-spoken man from Providence, Rhode Island, became a worldwide symbol of kindness, empathy, and justice with heart. And the question is, how? The answer, of course, isn't just in what he did. It's in how he did it. Let's start with the obvious. Judge Caprio wasn't your typical judge. Sure, he wore the robe and followed the law, but when you watched him in action, you quickly realized he wasn't only about enforcing the rules. He was about understanding people. He brought something into the courtroom that a lot of people didn't expect to find there: compassion. His courtroom show, Caught in Providence, was originally just a local broadcast. It showed footage of real people dealing with real violations, usually things like parking tickets, expired tags, or minor traffic offenses. Nothing dramatic. No sensational courtroom drama. Just the everyday stuff that clogs up courts across America. But the magic wasn't in the cases. It was in how Judge Caprio handled them. You'd see someone walk up, a single mom with kids, an elderly veteran, a teenager trying to pay a ticket with change, and instead of lecturing or rushing them through the system, Caprio would talk to them, like a real person. He'd ask how they were doing, ask about their life. Sometimes he'd crack a joke. Sometimes he'd get serious. And sometimes, more often than not, he'd show mercy. He had this way of looking beyond the ticket and seeing the person behind it. That's what made the difference. Because let's face it, most of us have felt like a number in the system at one point or another. Watching Judge Caprio felt like watching the system at its best, not just fair, but human. And that humanity? It translated. Big time. As clips from Caught in Providence started getting shared online, people all over the world began to notice. A short video of Judge Caprio forgiving a parking ticket for a woman caring for her disabled son, viral. A clip of him laughing with a little kid while reviewing their dad's case, viral. A tear-jerking moment where he lets someone off the hook because of their financial struggles, viral. But none of it felt staged or scripted. That was the magic. It didn't feel like reality TV. It felt like real life. And in a world that sometimes feels colder by the day, Caprio reminded people of the warmth that still exists.
For 40 years, Judge Frank Caprio would hear cases from his Providence, Rhode Island bench, along the way earning the reputation as America's nicest judge.
He was the rare figure that united people across political, cultural, and national divides. It didn't matter where you lived. Whether you were watching from Mumbai, Manchester, or Missouri, you could relate to what he stood for. Everyone understands struggle. Everyone appreciates kindness. Everyone wants to feel heard and treated with dignity. And that's exactly what Caprio gave people. Not just the folks in his courtroom, but the millions watching at home. He also had that rare quality of being gentle without being weak, firm without being cruel. He held people accountable, but never made them feel small. He never humiliated anyone. Even when he had to issue fines or say no, he did it with a sense of fairness that made it easier to accept. And let's not forget, he was funny. His sense of humor was playful, warm, and disarming. People laughed with him because he laughed first, with a twinkle in his eye that made you feel like you were part of a shared inside joke. But maybe the real reason Judge Caprio became so beloved around the world is this. He reminded us what justice is supposed to look like. Too often, justice feels like a machine, cold, unfeeling, detached. It's easy to forget that real people are behind every case, every number, every fine. Caprio never forgot. He lived by a simple philosophy. The law must be reasonable, and justice without compassion isn't justice at all. That line, spoken many times by Caprio, was more than a slogan. It was a way of life. And people could see that. They felt it. In a world flooded with content, full of noise, full of opinions and outrage, his courtroom clips stood out like a breath of fresh air. No shouting, no moral grandstanding, just a calm, kind man trying to do the right thing. Even outside the courtroom, Caprio's life echoed the values he showed on TV. He was the son of Italian immigrants, grew up in a working-class neighborhood, and never forgot his roots. His father was a fruit peddler with a fourth-grade education, and Caprio often spoke about how his dad would listen to Supreme Court arguments on the radio, inspiring a young Frank to believe he could do more or be more, and he never let go of that humility. Despite his fame, he remained grounded. When fans stopped him on the street, he didn't brush them off. He smiled, chatted, and posed for photos. He saw people. He valued them. That doesn't go unnoticed. So why is the judge one of humanity's favorite people that have ever lived? Because he made justice feel human again. Because he showed that fairness doesn't have to come without kindness. Because he gave people something to believe in. A reminder that compassion can coexist with accountability, and that goodness, even in small doses, can go a long way. In a time when trust in institutions feels like it's unraveling, Judge Caprio stood as proof that there are still people in power who care, really, deeply care, about doing right by others. He didn't just represent the law. He represented hope. But what exactly made Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom so unforgettable to millions of people around the world? Let's revisit some of his most heartwarming and impactful moments that perfectly captured the spirit of his show. Top 5 best and viral episodes of Judge Frank's show. When you think of Caught in Providence, what probably comes to mind is not just a courtroom. It's a place where rules meet reality, and where law is served with a heavy side of compassion. Judge Frank Caprio turned his small municipal courtroom into a global stage, not by being harsh or dramatic, but by being warm, relatable, and deeply human. Over the years, Dozens of moments stood out, but these 5 episodes, or more accurately, unforgettable courtroom exchanges, captured hearts and went viral for all the right reasons. 17 million views. One of the most iconic episodes features an elderly woman who came in with a few red light violations. Before Judge Caprio could even speak, she waved her hand and said, "I'm guilty. I don't want to waste your time." It was such a simple, honest declaration that it made Caprio chuckle. But rather than accept her guilty plea on the spot, he kindly insisted they take a look at the footage together. What followed was a sweet exchange where Caprio carefully walked her through each violation, ultimately dismissing most of them and significantly reducing her fine. What made this episode shine wasn't the legal technicalities, it was the way Caprio handled her humility with equal humility. He didn't rush, he didn't scold, he made her feel heard. That was the heart of his courtroom. No one was ever just a number or a ticket. 16 million views. Another deeply loved episode featured a young college student who parked illegally during what she described as a medical emergency. Nervously, she kept repeating the word honestly as she tried to explain herself.
First time they broke my window because I live in a lot of bars, and the second time they make a lot of with the pencil stuff on my car, so that's why I have to park in front of my house even though I know I am gonna get tickets.
Caprio, with a half smile, interrupted her gently and said, "You know, the more you say honestly, the more I start to worry." The courtroom laughed, but it wasn't mocking. It was Caprio using humor to ease the tension. In the end, he believed her story, reminded her to be careful, and dismissed the fine. That moment perfectly captured how he balanced being firm with being fair. It wasn't about technicalities. It was about reading people and choosing compassion when it was deserved. 15 million views. Then there was the episode that had everyone, from casual viewers to longtime fans, laughing and smiling. The one where a young mother showed up in court with her 5 children in tow. Her ticket was minor, just a few miles over the speed limit. But the real highlight came when Judge Caprio invited her youngest son, a bubbly 5-year-old named Alex, up to the bench. With the microphone in front of him and a crowd watching, Caprio asked what the sentence should be. Without hesitation, Alex shouted, "5 days in jail!" The room burst into laughter, and Caprio played along, then had Alex dismiss the case himself with a big grin. It was courtroom gold, genuine, hilarious, and heartwarming. More than just a cute moment, it showed how Caprio turned even the most routine cases into meaningful human interactions, often inviting children into the process to remind everyone that empathy and joy belong even in the world of justice. Several episodes stand out for their emotional depth too, like the time a grieving mother came into court with over $400 in tickets. She explained through tears that she had recently lost her child and had fallen behind financially. Caprio didn't just waive her fines, he spoke to her with deep empathy, thanked her for her courage, and made sure she left with dignity, not debt. In that courtroom, she wasn't just a woman with overdue tickets, she was a mother in pain. And Caprio gave her something few expect to receive in a courtroom: emotional comfort. That episode stayed with so many viewers because it was a reminder that life doesn't always follow the rules neatly. And justice, when it's done right, accounts for that. Another moment that gained global admiration was when Caprio offered a young boy named Armani a choice between 3 fine amounts for his mother's traffic tickets: $695, $495, or $315. The boy, after thinking hard, picked the lowest number, and Caprio smiled and said, "That was a smart decision." Everyone laughed, but it was more than just a joke. It was a moment where a child's innocence softened the sharpness of the legal process. These small, shared moments of laughter and learning were part of what made Caught in Providence so beloved. It wasn't about court outcomes, it was about community. What makes these episodes so powerful and unforgettable? It's not just the content, it's the context. These weren't major legal battles or dramatic cross-examinations. They were ordinary people, often vulnerable, often struggling, coming face to face with a judge who took the time to see them. Whether it was an old man explaining his war service, a child helping decide a sentence, or a mom simply trying to get by, Judge Caprio offered each person a moment of humanity. He was warm, but not naive. He didn't let everyone off the hook, but he always listened. He asked questions. He let people explain. And even when he enforced the law, he did so in a way that didn't shame or belittle. That's why his episodes got millions, sometimes tens of millions of views. They weren't just entertaining, they were meaningful. They restored something that's often lost in our systems and screens. The idea that kindness isn't weakness, and that justice doesn't have to be cold. Each of these episodes wasn't just a good moment on TV, they were lessons in empathy, delivered by a man in a robe who never let that robe come between himself and the people he served. Judge Frank Caprio didn't just preside over a courtroom, he invited the world into it. And through that simple act, he gave us all a glimpse of what justice can look like when it's driven by heart. The death of Judge Frank Caprio marks the end of an era, but more importantly, it cements the legacy of a man who redefined what justice could feel like. His passing isn't just the loss of a public figure or a familiar face on our screens. It feels personal because in so many ways, he was personal. He didn't hide behind a bench or speak only in legal jargon. He looked people in the eye, smiled with them, cried with them, and reminded the world that the law doesn't have to be cold to be just. Rest in peace, Judge Caprio. The world is better because you were in it. What's your favorite Judge Caprio moment, whether in person or in one of his moments online? Share your stories in memory of the most beloved judge in the world. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more.